Hey guys, so I wanted to tell you guys the birth story of my baby girl Lila. And so just a disclaimer before I begin talking about what I experienced during my labor, there is graphic information that goes on during obviously the childbirthing process. So if you are not comfortable with it, I would leave. But if you are generally interested in the progression of the labor and how I coped with everything, stay tuned. I'm going to talk all about it. The lead up to me actually going into labor was a very confusing time for me. Really, I was in pre-labor for about 48 hours before I actually went into labor. She ended up coming on a Monday. On that Saturday night and that Sunday night, I was having contractions all the time. The only issue was they weren't changing. There was only like one time where I felt like for that hour, the contractions were a lot more painful and there was a lot more pressure. And actually right after that happened, I had a little bit of what they call like a bloody show. And sorry guys, I know that the descriptions of these things are not exactly fun to listen to, but yeah, so I could tell that stuff was changing, and I thought that I was going into labor and that this was gonna happen, like there was no doubt about it. And so I'm calling up my mother-in-law and I'm calling up my mom and I'm like, all right guys, get ready because things are gonna happen. Well, it didn't happen, and actually my contractions ended up going away for the entire night, and I was able to get the best sleep that I think I've ever had before during the third trimester of my pregnancy. I woke up at about 10:30 and I was like, all right, today I have a final. I'm gonna go do my final. But immediately when I woke up, my contractions were 2 to 3 minutes apart, and they were lasting for about 50 seconds long. So I was like, whoa, this is a huge difference between what I was experiencing for the past couple days, because my contractions were not very close together. They were anywhere between 6 minutes and 10 minutes apart for the whole 48 hours before Monday hit. And so, the intensity of them really hadn't changed at all. It was just that the time frame in between the contractions was way short. And so I'm like freaking out. I'm like, oh, 2 or 3 minutes apart. Like they say to go to the hospital when you're having them 5 minutes apart. So I'm like, oh, there's no way that I'm not like dilated like crazy. So, my husband didn't want to like rush to the hospital. So we stayed at home. We timed them 45 minutes to an hour, and they kept on coming every 2 to 3 minutes. And I was like, there's no way this isn't real. I'm going in. There's no way this is not happening. And so we packed up, the last minute stuff you need in your like hospital bag before you end up going in. And then we headed to the hospital. But when I was in the car, I noticed that my contractions stopped coming as quickly. And I actually had an interval of like 6 or 7 minutes where I didn't have any contractions. And be right back, that baby's crying. So where was I? So I had an interval of like 6 to 7 minutes where I was not having any contractions anymore. And I was like, oh no, I just dropped off my son. I sounded the alarm. There's no way that this can't be happening. Like, this can't be a false alarm. So, we got to the hospital, and, the minute I stood up, the contractions started again. So then I was like, oh, thank God. Thank you. Let's let this be the real thing. And, we get into the hospital. They put me on the monitor for maybe like 20 minutes because they wanted to monitor how often they were coming. So she said everything looked good. She said, I'm pretty sure we're going to end up keeping you. She ended up checking me to see how dilated I was, and I was at a 3.5. And, that's at that point where they're like, well, we could keep you, but, this also could be a false alarm, so we're not going to admit you yet. And then they told me to go do the walk. So they said, walk down the hallway. We're not saying that we're not going to admit you 100%, but we're going to check you in about an hour. But we want you to walk around. We want you to get movement going, see if we can't get these contractions and to pick up, or when we check you, we're hoping to see some sort of a change, more effacement, more dilation, what and whatnot. And I believe that at this point I was like 3.5 centimeters dilated and like 70 or 80% effaced. So we were swaying and walking down the hallway, and my contractions were coming, right on schedule every single time. And, noticeably, by the time the hour was up, I had noticed that there was a difference in the amount of pressure, and there was a difference in the amount of tightness that I was getting. So that the contractions definitely changed. So I was really, really hopeful that when she checked me, there was going to be some physical change in the dilation or effacement. So when she checked me, I had dilated another centimeter. I was like 4.5 centimeters dilated, and she's like, congratulations, we're having a baby today. Hey baby, what are you doing? So I was like, yes. I had planned from the very start to do a natural delivery, a natural labor. I didn't want to use any pain medications or anything like that. Immediately when I got in my room, they had the phlebotomist come in and draw my blood, which that was horrible. I ended up getting this huge bruise on my arm, but she was also trying to draw my blood while I was like in between contractions. So I get into the birthing tub almost immediately after. I have to say that the water definitely helped me to cope with the contractions, and I was noticing that they were coming a lot more often, and I was noticing that they had really, really picked up in intensity, and I was really having to work hard to breathe through the contractions. I could feel her moving downwards. So after about an hour or two of me being in the tub, the nurse came in and she checked me, and she was like, oh, okay, well, we're at about 5.5 centimeters. So I was dilating pretty quickly. Oh my gosh, I'm already over halfway there. Well, I was thinking that it was going to be a lot longer than it really took for me to get to the point where I was pushing her out and she was out. After about an hour, they could hear it in my voice. I was vocalizing my during the contractions a lot more than I was before. So I was really, really working hard to cope with the contractions. My husband, he was rubbing my back. He was so great. He was talking me through the breathing and, reading. Actually, I'll pull out the book. So we took this one, sorry, the glare, The Birth Partner, and we're using a lot of the coping mechanisms that are in that book. It's a great book. I highly recommend you pick it up if you are planning on doing a natural birth. Even if you're not planning on doing a natural birth, there is so much information in there. It is so useful, and it'll really help prepare you and your partner for a smooth labor process. And that's exactly what I got. My husband was there for me every single step of the way, every single contraction there was nothing that he could have done better. And so, the nurses, like I was saying before, they heard it in my voice. They heard it in my voice that it could have been time to push. So, they had me get out of the tub to check me. And when they checked me, they're like, you're at an 8.5. Yeah, so they did not let me get back in the tub after they checked me and I was at an 8.5. But they did, however, let me set myself up on the birth bed or the hospital bed in any position that I wanted, whatever I felt comfortable with. So I had gotten myself set up kind of where I was kneeling down on the bed, but hanging over. I was hanging over the end of the bed. They had lifted it up so it was at an angle like this, and I was just hanging over it, you know, in a kneeling position. And, you know, the contractions were coming one after the other. And this was that famous transition stage where it's just like, when is this over? Like, can I do this? And, you know, I never actually like vocalized that out. From the start, I wanted to do it naturally. I never wanted to give up. My husband pulled out like this lavender massaging oil. I've always loved the smell of it. It's the vanilla lavender one from Bath and Body Works. He just was rubbing like my lower back and rubbing my shoulders while I was hanging over the side of the bed. My midwife started saying, you know, I think that if you want to push, you can push. And she's like, why don't you turn over? So I ended up kind of turning over into like a laying position, and I pushed a couple times, and she's like, you know, her head is like right there. And so I was like, oh my gosh, really? And she's like, she said, you know, you only have like a bit of cervix left. Like you're almost completely effaced, and you're almost a 10. And so she's just like, let your body do whatever it's gonna do naturally, essentially, is what she said. And, you know, at this point, like, a lot of this was like a blur to me, because I had just completed transition, and I was about to push out my baby naturally. And this is like where in my mind I'm like, there's no going back. Like, I don't even have the option of like getting an epidural if I can't do this. And so she's just like, all right, let's push. And, you know, on that next contraction, I pushed, and, you know, I felt her come down a little bit more. And then I just kept pushing a few pushes later, and, you know, Lila was born into the world. And, you know, I ended up not tearing at all. I didn't need an episiotomy or anything. And, you know, my midwife was amazing. I had such a great experience with the birth of my daughter. I don't think I would try it any other way. I think that naturally my labor progressed so much more quickly doing it naturally than it did with my son. You know, there were some variances between the two of them. My son was almost 9 pounds versus this little one, like I said earlier in the video, she's 7 pounds 4 ounces, so much different size, different weights. You know, it was a completely different experience. With my son, I had gotten an epidural at about 4 centimeters dilated, and it was smooth sailing the whole time. I didn't require Pitocin or anything like that. Like, my body just did everything naturally, but I did end up needing an episiotomy. So every birth is different. I've experienced it both ways. I've experienced it with the epidural, and I've experienced it naturally. And personally, like, going naturally, it was hard work. It was hard work pushing her out and getting through all those contractions. But you know what? Like, it was so worth it. And at the end, you get that huge burst of endorphins, and everything's okay. Following the birth of Lila, she ended up having some breathing issues, and initially they thought maybe it could have been an infection or something like that, but they ended up taking her away from me after 24 hours, and she ended up in the special care nursery, and she had to be put on a cannula and, you know, oxygen. She ended up being in there for 5 days. She ended up having to go under the light, and after 5 days I was finally able to take her home. I ended up staying in the hospital for 2 days for me, and I got discharged after 48 hours. And they gave me what they call a nesting room. So they're overflow delivery rooms that weren't in use at the time. Any parents that have babies that are in the special care nursery, they set them up in there, and the mom can continue getting meals and everything like that sent to her from the hospital. So I ended up staying in there for another day, but, you know, after the third night, that we were at the hospital, a very large influx of laboring moms came in, and they ended up needing the delivery room. So all of the nesting moms had to be evacuated from their rooms, so that way there was a place for, you know, the new mommies to give birth. So I ended up having to go home. You know, I'm an exclusive breastfeeder, so I had to drive there to the hospital every few hours to feed her, and then I drive home, catch like 45 minutes of sleep, an hour of sleep, sometimes no sleep at all, depending on what I had to do. It was exhausting, so I did that for another couple of days, and finally I got to take my baby home, and you know, ever since, she's just in my arms all the time. This is her favorite place to be, and you know, I love the fact that she is so comforted by me, but sometimes I wish that daddy could comfort you the same way I can, but she is totally asleep. She's a very sweet baby. But yeah, that's the birth story of my little girl Lila. And if you have any questions, or you want to talk about, you know, the birth of your baby, if you have any questions about natural delivery or anything like that, I think I'm going to be making a video sometime in the future talking about all the different resources that I use to I guess learn about natural birth. And so you should subscribe and, you know, comment below if there's anything that you want to see in that video, or, you know, if you have any questions for me, maybe I'll do a Q&A sometime in the future. But all y'all have a wonderful day.